Welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm Kate Dickerson. Today's episode is a conversation I had with Jane Disney, Associate Professor of Environmental Health at MDI Biological Laboratory. I've been a huge fan of Jane's work for years, and I really enjoyed hearing more about her fantastically circuitous science path, and am beyond impressed at the impact she has made for and on students, teachers, and Maine communities. Our conversation was recorded in March 2026. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So Jane, welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I am delighted that I finally get to have you on my podcast. I've been a fan of yours from afar and nearby for years. And before we dive into, you actually have quite a few projects that I'm interested in hearing about. I'm curious how you got into science in general and then the work that you're doing now. And we'll ask that without actually telling anybody what you're doing now.
Okay, we'll keep it a surprise. When they hear my career path, they'll never be able to guess.
Perfect. That's exactly what we're going for.
I would say that I became interested in science in an AP biology class in high school. And in particular, because they didn't want to let me into the class because I wasn't honors track. And so I was new to the school, and my old school didn't have an honors track, and there was no way to get into it in my new school. I did go to the principal and tell him that I was dropping out of school if he didn't let me into AP biology, and I was serious. And so he talked to the teacher and said, we're not going to have a kid drop out of school over AP biology. Give her a chance. And all I can say is I struggled in AP biology and then got mono and spent 3 months at home. The teacher sent me a note saying, I guess you have to drop out of this class now. And I sent her a note back via a friend that said, over my dead body. I think I stuck with science because it was hard and people didn't think I could do it, which is not the best reason to do something. But it was a challenge, and maybe I just like the challenge on all those levels, both subject matter, and it was just a challenge for students like me.
There must have been something about biology in particular, though, that you found appealing so that when those roadblocks went up, it wasn't just being obstinate. And I mean obstinate in all the good ways. I'm cheering you on here. There must have been something about biology.
Well, I didn't grow up in a really scientific household or anything, and we didn't do a lot of, explorations of the natural world together as a family, but we lived outside, my brothers and sisters and I, so I felt close to nature anyhow. And I lived in suburban New Jersey, so the little strip of trees behind my house was like a whole forest to me. Yeah, I always loved the natural world. My mom was a nurse, so I think that I was intrigued about human health, and in particular, reproductive health. My mom was a neonatal care nurse, so that probably was triggering some thinking as well. But long story short, I managed to get through that class, and the teacher recognized my special qualities because I received the biology award at graduation, which also reinforced for me that I was on the right path. So I did go to Penn State to study. Well, really, I started in pre-med, but switched over to biology. I was working with my advisor that helps you pick out classes. He asked me to do work study in his lab. And he said he would meet me in his lab, on a Thursday afternoon after lunch. And he would be stopping at the hatchery and then coming over to the lab. And I, in my mind, figured he was at a chicken hatchery or something. But he walked in the lab with buckets of fish. And I was like, oh, a fish hatchery. Anyhow, I spent the next 10 years studying the evolution of trout and salmon. I got both my master's and my PhD in trout and salmon evolution, and was most interested in chromosomal structure and function and evolution in these fishes, which is a fascinating story unto itself.
Did you find, after that first biology class, you said it was hard. And I remember when I was taking intro to chemistry, so I was a chemistry major, and it was not fun. It was hard. And it was only as I got into the later classes where actually the intro stuff made sense because you could take a deeper dive. So I'm curious, as you got more into the biology and the genetics, Did it feel like it was easier, both because you had a better background, but also because something about it made more sense to you?
Really not until graduate school. So I continued to struggle, I think, as an undergraduate, in part because there wasn't a concerted effort on the part of any of my professors to make what I was learning relevant. And there were really limited opportunities to get your hands on things and really experience science. There was little to no undergraduate research going on at that time at Penn State. So it was this work-study position my senior year that really opened the research doors to me because I'd never had an opportunity to get my hands on things in a lab setting. I mean, I had a few summer jobs that were science-oriented, but they were more like rote protocols and not, exploration type opportunities. If there was anything like NSF REU back then, summer research fellowships and those kinds of things, I wasn't aware of them and nobody made me aware of them. But it was getting in the lab and seeing like, oh, this is why I learned all these things. And now I see how they relate. I understood cell division and meiosis and evolution in ways I never did in the classroom as I was watching these things unfold with this research animal that I was working with. Anyhow, by the time I finished my PhD, I was pretty skilled in doing all kinds of chromosomal type work. And there was a postdoctoral opportunity. By this time, I was at Washington State University to work with human and mouse cells, but doing some chromosomal work. The professor was actually looking for someone who had my kind of background, and that didn't exist in other people in his lab. That was exciting to me to try all these things in like a different context, in a cell culture context, instead of in these fish. And I took it on and was able to make a lot of progress and publish a paper and get a second postdoc, which, by the way, was at the Jackson Lab, which brought me from the West Coast to the East. So now I was not just working in mouse cells, but working with the whole mouse. And it was all interesting and wonderful, and I could do it. Had published 5 papers before I got out of my 20s. And I was like, maybe I can do this thing. At the same time, there were still some barriers. I had gotten married along the way, and I had a baby, and he was kindergarten age by the time I finished my second postdoc, and it wasn't easy to balance after kindergarten pickups in my research life. There were no opportunities for part-time postdoctoral work. I was asking questions about that, and the answer was no. And my husband was a full-time scientist, also at the Jackson Lab. So I did, at that time, make the decision to go into education. So I left my second postdoc and was fortunate to get a job at MDI High School. And I taught there for 10 years. And I was compelled to do it, not just because it really worked with my family life at the time, but also to sort of try to make up for those high school years that I had that almost kept me from becoming a scientist. I thought it would be fun. I saw this job opening at the high school, and I thought, you know what? What if we did high school biology differently? And for 10 years, we did do it differently. Everything was project-based. There was nothing I taught students that I couldn't make relevant for them. They were engaged in all kinds of real-world research. And because the easy thing to involve students in was environmental research here on the coast of Maine, it was not as easy to think about having them do authentic genetics research. It is these days, but we didn't have the tools to do that in the classroom back in those days. So we did a lot of environmental work, and we worked on a Partners in Monitoring grant through the state of Maine and the Frenchman Bay Conservancy. The DMR and DEP were in our realm, helping us choose sample sites, look at water quality, do things that were making a difference at the local and state level. The whole Maine Healthy Beaches program was born out of these efforts at our school and other schools. Our students were so proud of themselves, they nominated themselves for a SeaWorld Busch Gardens Environmental Excellence Award. And they won in the category of citizen science, which is exciting to me because at the time, I didn't know what citizen science was. But I guess we were doing it, and we got an award for it.
As you're talking, I'm seeing the whole career path and up to now what you're doing, so we can let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, because you are at MDI Biolab now. But listeners of this podcast and other people who know about MDI Biolab, you are in many ways an outlier to what the other research is that happens there.
That's right.
So I'll let you explain. I mean, a good outlier, don't get me wrong, but you are not slotted in very easily into the rest of MDI Biolab in that way.
Well, I'll just say that when we went down to SeaWorld Busch Gardens to get our Citizen Science Award, we gave a presentation, and so did other schools that had won awards in other categories. And they picked a grand prize winner for the whole year, and we got the grand prize and brought home $27,500 to the classroom, which was a lot of money. And George Marnick was the principal at the time, and he took me aside. He said, "Jane, if I were you, I would get an AmeriCorps environmental steward to come in and help you do all this environmental work and grow this program the way you really are dreaming of doing it." So we did. Eventually, it just took on a life of its own, and the students helped launch a nonprofit organization out of the classroom, which I later left the high school to lead, and that was the MDI Water Quality Coalition. We did need lab space for the kinds of environmental monitoring and research we were doing, and I found that at the Biolab in the year 2000, so 26 years ago. So for the first 9 years that I was here at the lab, I was part of a nonprofit organization. I wasn't on staff. So in 2009, I came on staff, and I've continued that environmental mission. And the work has really transitioned in recent years from doing mostly surface water investigations and marine conservation work, watershed level work, to looking at groundwater issues, in particular drinking water. So that fits, I think, well with the kind of research going on here at the lab. So mostly what we're doing is environmental health and public health research now, and I see us as the preventative health end of the biolab, whereas my colleagues here are largely focused on regeneration and aging, but through drug discovery and disease treatment lens.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I guess what I was thinking more like, you are not working with cells and other things, but it's a really excellent point to point out you're both going at the same thing, just from different perspectives. So I appreciate that.
Yes, we're working on different ends of the spectrum of trying to protect and improve human health.
And you're still actively using high school students involved in all of this, right? And has it expanded into undergrads with REUs or not?
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm sorry, we should explain what an REU is.
Sure, a research experience for undergraduates. Yeah. I have had the great fortune to land here and be able to sort of carry out all of my research and education dreams here. Who knew this was even possible? I applied for a Science Education Partnership Award from NIH and didn't get it, which made me want to apply for another one, which I did not get. And knowing me and how determined I am, you can imagine I did apply again, and the third time was a charm. So we got this $1.25 million award over 5 years to work with teachers across Maine and New Hampshire and engage their students as citizen scientists in collecting drinking water samples for analysis of arsenic and other toxic metals. And so the students are taught how to analyze the data, make sense of it, and communicate it to their neighbors and families, and try to affect change both at the local and state level, which our students have been doing over the last 8 years. So I'm now on my second SEPA grant. We finished the first 5-year grant, and we're 3 years into our second 5-year grant. And we've had, I think over 5,300 students and out of 40 different schools and teachers involved. It's really been growing like exponentially.
Are you able to set the projects up so they're like semester chunks, basically? Or is it year round?
It's up to the teacher.
First of all, that's a lot of students and that's a lot of work.
Yes, but that was over all the years. That's not every year.
That's still a lot of students for a research project that's continuing. I mean, that is really impressive.
Yep, it's out of hand, but we've managed to stop at various points in time and do some summative work and publish some papers on the progress we've been making and on the data sets that the students have generated to help give some perspective to what contribution the students' work makes for Maine CDC, for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. As a matter of fact, in New Hampshire, they were so impressed with how many water samples we were able to get because they do outreach as well, and it's hard to get people to test their water, that they went to the New Hampshire legislature to get funding for more teachers in New Hampshire to be involved. So this year, for the first time, we brought on 5 additional schools and teachers to try to amplify how many water samples we're collecting in New Hampshire. I just had some results come back from Bow, New Hampshire, which is not atypical for Bow, where half the samples are above the drinking water standard for arsenic. So we're reaching every year so many families that had no idea they were being exposed to toxic metals like arsenic, uranium, lead, manganese. So we're doing this big, really public health effort on top of this teaching and learning effort. We train all the teachers here. We partner them with scientists from around the IMBRI networks in both states. IMBRI networks are these collectives of institutions that have a grant from NIGMS, the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, to promote biomedical research and undergraduate research opportunities around both states. So sometimes the scientist partners bring in their undergraduates to work with these high school teachers and students. There's just so many connections happening across these states, and that's how we're able to pull this off. We have agents on the ground in every school district, which are my scientist partners who visit classrooms, they respond to teacher requests, they will bring their undergraduates either into the classroom or bring high school students to their campuses for conversations about what the data mean and how to communicate the data. This latest iteration of our SEPA grant is focused on science communication because we found heading into the first grant, I would say our biggest challenge was data literacy and helping the students understand the data. But we have worked with a company called tuvalabs.com, and they have helped us create a working platform that utilizes their technology but takes all the student data and makes it available for them to easily graph and map and look at. So I think that we have all the tools in place and the platform that we need for student engagement with the data, but then talking about it was still hard. So that's why the science communication piece is our focus right now. And things are going along pretty well. We have a new science communication toolkit on our All About Arsenic website that the teachers are using. And this year, our evaluators are creating a pretty novel pre and post science communication assessment so that we can maybe try to quantify just how successful we're being in trying to bring these tools to students that they can really use. So you see, I'm still trying to work with teachers and kids and give them things that are locally relevant to them and provide meaning and context to these difficult things that they're learning, because that's what was missing for me, both at the high school level and at my own undergraduate level, and are the things that at the end of the day didn't hold me back from becoming a scientist, but made it more difficult than it should have been. And there's probably many more students who were like me that didn't realize this dream because there were all kinds of barriers in their way, including just good pedagogy.
So it's interesting, the arsenic, that's, if I have it correct, it's naturally occurring, right?
In bedrock in both states, yep.
And people may not realize just how many places rely on well water, which is where this all comes from.
56% of households in Maine.
And what's the number in New Hampshire? Do you know?
40% or so.
Yeah, it's huge. It's just a huge number.
Yeah, a lot of people on private wells. Then work that's not connected as much with the schools, but is really based on what was happening in schools, is the work we're doing with the PFAS right now. So it was challenging enough to deal with toxic metals in people's water. I always thought at some point somebody was going to say, what the heck are you doing? This is upsetting for families to get this information. And is this really what you should have kids engaged in doing? All these years and all these water samples, I've never had one family that was upset or frustrated or angry that we discovered these things about their drinking water. I mean, if they did feel that way, they never communicated it to me. It seemed to go well. And I think one of the reasons is that arsenic and these toxic metals are naturally occurring. They're just here. There's nothing anyone can do about it except for to respond to the fact that it's in your drinking water and take the appropriate actions to keep your family healthy and safe. Now, the PFAS issue, which these are those per and polyfluoral alkyl substances we've been hearing about that are just in all kinds of products that we use at home. So it's no surprise that these chemicals that go down the drain and into our septic systems in rural Maine and New Hampshire might eventually find their way to groundwater and then our drinking water, which is what has happened. But PFAS is man-made. It's not naturally occurring. And it's very frustrating that we didn't know it was in our products and we wonder who's to blame. So far, we've been navigating this with neighbors and community members, but it's not a project that I directly have kids engaged with, although we've created a little bit of curriculum because they're hearing about it, and since they're working on well water, they want to know. And also in New Hampshire, we have some of our schools are in communities where there were huge PFAS contamination events of public drinking water where no one there can drink their water. So these kids already knew about well water issues just based on the fact they were living one of these PFAS nightmares in their own community. But yeah, in terms of the rural areas, what happened in 2022 is that all schools and daycares were required to test their drinking water for PFAS, and quite a few schools in Maine discovered that they had this contaminant in their drinking water and had to put in filtration systems. And because of our reputation as being experts in well water now, who knew that's what would happen, we were getting calls from neighbors who lived near these contaminated schools asking us if it was possible that their wells would be contaminated too. And I said, well, I don't know anything about PFAS. I work on arsenic. But they dragged me in, and there was a brand new laboratory that opened here in Maine called Maine PFAS Laboratories about the same time. And they partnered with us in trying to get people's wells tested around these schools. And yeah, we found that homes around these schools were also contaminated with PFAS. We published a paper on that in Environmental Health Perspectives and continue to look at other schools and school communities. But in addition to that, we've had some communities that have wanted to do more wide-scale testing of households. And that's been an eye-opener. So in rural communities, the school isn't the only source of contamination. As a matter of fact, I would say for the most part, in rural communities, we're all contaminating our own wells. Because if the school could put something down the drain that ended up in the water, so could we. And we have. I have. It's in my well. And it's in other community wells we're looking at. So I have recently submitted a grant to EPA for an environmental education grant to engage kids in these communities that we've been working to look at products that they have under their kitchen sinks. So I'm thinking about more having kids involved in inventories of products either at their schools or in their homes that maybe we can begin to correlate with what we've been finding in drinking water and maybe get these products out of the homes.
So did you not want high school kids to be part of the testing because it's such a difficult issue and human-made and we still don't really know how to deal with it all? And so we'd be kind of feeding them to the beast, so to speak?
Well, there's that. I think just knowing what I know from all we've been doing to date, I think it is a fraught issue that will bring up a lot more for people. The highest arsenic areas in Maine is in Blue Hill, but also some of the most expensive homes are in Blue Hill. I mean, beautiful homes. I don't think arsenic and other toxic metals are really affecting home values because people who live in these high arsenic areas just have filtration systems in their homes, and it's a given that that's what you need. But PFAS is a little bit more ubiquitous at this point, and people are unsure about it. Everyone knows arsenic is toxic, but what is this PFAS stuff? And there's changing standards around it, right? There's been a lot of change happening. And then the other thing is that it's very expensive to test for PFAS. We have a great working relationship with the Trace Element Analysis Corps at Dartmouth that does all of these school samples at a very reasonable price. And I will say like under $20 per sample for 14 toxic metals. That's how we've been able to afford to do this. But you're getting closer to $300 per sample, right? And because the clothing we have on and everything around us has PFAS in it, it's easy to cross-contaminate these PFAS samples. So we used to be giving out kits locally and have people submit the samples themselves to Maine laboratories. And at some point, we just decided, based on the fact that there was cross-contamination happening and shipping was unreliable, we worked out a system where we go in the home, we take the sample, we observe what filtration they have because people don't understand their own filtration system. So we can link all that information together, and then we have an arrangement to have a courier pick up water samples and take them in mass to Maine laboratories, and then they do report back to families, but also we get the data set so we can start putting two and two together about who's contaminating who and what the priority should be for looking at effects of exposures to PFAS and that kind of thing.
So that whole part about cross-contamination and proper sampling methods and all, like, I think that's a part of lab work and environmental work that people don't understand how important it is and how much it really can mess with what your data tells you. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, the other thing about arsenic is that if you find out you have it in your drinking water and then you filter or start drinking some other source of water, the arsenic in your body goes down. We can excrete arsenic. And the other unsettling thing about PFAS is that it's a forever chemical and it builds up in our bodies. And it's got these plethora of health effects that are unsettling too. So I think there's all these concerns when thinking about how kids will be involved. But I really like the idea of having kids involved in solution making.
So I didn't want to drop that. Like when you said they go on the front end and see what do they have and then start thinking about, how do we swap this out? But I think that not only provides the opportunity for education, but it provides agency to the kids as well.
Absolutely. And we've had success with that in the Arsenic Project. We've actually on our website have created a civic action toolkit as well and worked with Defend Our Health to engage kids in understanding how bills get passed and what legislation is in the works in Maine or New Hampshire. And we teach them about letters to the editor and op-ed pieces and giving testimony, showing up at public hearings. And students were involved in a piece of Maine legislation that ended up providing funding for low-income households and landlords to deal with contaminants in drinking water. And that piece of legislation included all contaminants, not just arsenic and other toxic metals. So $400,000 was allocated, and people can apply for it through the Maine Housing Authority. And we've had some of the households affected by PFAS actually qualify for some of those funds through the state of Maine. And just the thought that, full circle, those were my students that helped get that legislation passed. So it's, a feedback loop of the students making a difference and then we and others being able to continue to benefit from that difference that the students made. So we like to tell that story to keep kids engaged.
So you clearly figured out how to approach biology and the systems around us in a way that was different than how you were engaged with it. Have you been fortunate enough to hear back from former students that it's been impactful for them as they decide what to do with their lives?
Oh, all the time. You had asked earlier about the research experience for undergraduates. We have one of those National Science Foundation grants here at the Biolab. For one round, I was the principal investigator on that grant. Now I'm the co-investigator on that grant. And so we've had many REU students, but also these Embry-funded students through our network in our lab. And as part of our lab, they learn it all, right? Every summer, there's a teacher training workshop related to SEPA. Everyone's involved. But also, we continue to work with the Maine DEP and Maine DMR on a couple of important environmental projects. So these students, definitely, I'm able to track and see where they go. And we've had numerous students go on for graduate degrees and who are now scientists of all sorts. Their grounding was in this environmental health work, but now they're immunologists or neuroscientists or all kinds of things, doctors, dentists, and also other things. Like some of them become musicians because all these students are multi-talented. They could become musicians or they could become scientists, and they go down one road or the other. I have former students, even from the high school, who, like, one is a professor at the College of the Atlantic, right here down the road. The principal at Surrey School was a student of mine in high school, and now she is having her teachers be involved in our SEPA program.
Oh, that's really cool.
When she was teaching at Mount Desert Elementary, she was involved in the SEPA program there. And when I would come into the classroom, she was like, this was my science teacher. And she convinced me that I wanted to be a science teacher. So I think those are the things that sometimes make me the happiest, or the students that decide education is the direction they want to go. I had an Island Institute fellow here for 2 years who was very interested in environmental science and conservation, and that's why she wanted to work with us. But now she's going for a master's in environmental education. So I think work in this lab sends students in lots of different directions because we really are interdisciplinary in lots of ways. We're doing some basic research, but we're also doing social science type things and how we're engaging with people and assessing how things are working with people. But then there's the citizen science work, and there's lots of avenues that you could pursue from here. Some of my former students have gone for these interdisciplinary PhDs at the University of Maine because they don't know how to not think that way anymore.
Which is fantastic. I love the idea of students who did the environmental health with you and then they go on to neuroscience or something else, because that's kind of like they're winding back your path where you were in genomics and genetics and ended up in this. It's fascinating to see those connections being made.
And I've come to the conclusion that I don't have to do it all, right? As long as I've inspired a few other people to pick up those batons and move forward. And I think when you first get started in science, you're thinking, it's all up to me, because scientists sometimes work like that. One scientist with one team in one lab, and you're working on very focused questions. I mean, more and more these days, people recognize that they need partnerships and collaborators because it's hard to be an island with the complexity of science these days. It takes many minds to solve some of the most difficult problems in science. But yeah, it's been a joy to see students move through this program and feel confident whether they wanted to go into education or the social sciences or clinical psychology, or they become hardcore scientists. That's great.
With all the interdisciplinary work that you have to do this work, has there been a field or an area that you have been surprised at how much you've enjoyed?
Well, I've entered into all kinds of areas I didn't know I would. For example, we've done a lot of human subjects research since we've started this, and particularly a current project going on in one of our school communities where we're actually looking at blood PFAS levels in children and parents who attended schools that had PFAS contaminated drinking water. Also looking at cardiometabolic metrics and administering drinking water and dietary surveys. So once you get into that realm, you're in human subjects work. And it's been a steep learning curve for me. This isn't my training. Working with IRB committees, Institutional Review Board, and getting the permissions that you need to do this kind of work with people. So that's been really fascinating. And every few years, I'm like, I wish I had gone to school to become something different. So I wish I had gone to school to become an epidemiologist, right? Because the epidemiology is really fascinating me these days. But I'm like learning some of the human subjects research skills, but I don't have the statistics and the advanced data analysis skills really to bring to it. So I have been working closely with a pediatric epidemiologist at Dartmouth. Her name is Megan Romano, and she's a huge help to me. There have been some things that I really wanted to learn, and I spent some time, like how to make GIS maps and look at how things are playing out on landscapes. But that technology kept getting like more advanced, and it was improving, but I couldn't keep up with it. And next thing you knew, I couldn't even make a map anymore. But I surround myself with mappers. I'm like, all right, every student that comes in here, I'm like, do you know how to map? But I also consult with a mapper who used to work in the lab. She's an ongoing consultant for me. And one, she meets with my students and helps to get them up to speed if they're interested. But two, she just makes my maps for publications, for grants. I've given up trying to be the mapper. So there's lots of new skills I've had to pick up. But I think the human subjects research is probably the biggest and the one that I'm most, entrenched with right now.
I'm going to hazard a guess that epidemiology wasn't even something that was thought about when you were in school. It wasn't when I was in school. I didn't even know that was an area of work.
Now there's some really wonderful high school level curriculum in epidemiology for students. It's something I want to introduce to my teachers. And it's like case-based, right? Because a lot of epidemiology is sort of forensic. Like there's an outbreak of an infectious disease and you're looking at all the data, the people and the landscape, and you're trying to figure out where did this start, and where is it spreading, and doing predictive modeling too for the future. There's a whole field out there that maybe high school students aren't aware of, but I think brings a lot of things together. Also, interestingly, I collaborate with geologists because of the whole arsenic and toxic metal thing. They're the ones that help me understand why we're having a lot of contamination over here, but not over there, and why we might anticipate it somewhere else, and maybe that's the community to engage next. Those same geologist, earth scientists are helping me with the PFAS issue and thinking about how it's possible for these chemicals to move from well to well and where else they might be moving in the environment and being taken up in the environment. And also helping me predict what's the next community that's likely to have a contamination event like this, or what's the next coastal area we should focus on because it's downstream or geologically ripe for movement of PFAS into that area. And so that's how we are setting some priorities for next places to study, is based on more hydrology and geology. Again, I can't know all these things.
I know, but they're so cool. I think we're all better off because you were super determined in high school to show everybody that they were wrong. So I personally am really grateful for your determination and your interest.
Well, let me tell you one thing, though. I have matured since my early 30s when I first became a teacher, because I did come into my high school teaching time pretty headstrong because I had this PhD and these postdoctoral experiences, and I had my thinking about how I wanted my classroom to look and how I wanted to change things for students. But I don't think I was very respectful of the years of experience that other teachers had and the approaches they were taking and what their thinking was and where they were coming from. And so I've learned over all these many years to be more considerate of everybody else's position, perspective, history, and then to look for what talents and skills that they have that I can draw on and connect them more with my vision or my work as opposed to alienating them on day one. So I try to walk more carefully these days and also be less impatient for things to change. I realize that you have to give space for people to begin to absorb the information that you're trying to share. And it may take longer than you want to wait, but I've just learned to let people catch up with me, and then we'll move forward together instead of racing ahead of them. So I just wanted to say that's something I try to also teach the students. Like, it might take people some time to get to where you are. You've been really living this for a while and they haven't. So unfortunately, students in a school year don't have a lot of time. They don't have that perspective of time either. So I help them think, what can they do? What messages can they get out in the time that they have to do it? Because once the school year is over, sometimes students have half-year courses. Once the course is over, it is difficult to re-engage kids who are no longer in that class. Teachers have trouble with that. It seems like it would be great if you could have some continuum, which is why the SEPA program that is focused on heavy metals and drinking water was originally designed for high school. We now include middle schools because I think middle school is a great testing ground for more long-term engagement of students, because often the middle school teacher will have students through 7th and 8th grade, for example. At Connors Emerson, they just were able to do a wonderful study where students in 7th grade took water samples, and when they got to 8th grade, they took them again in their homes to see if anything changed over time, which is something we're learning does happen, maybe just one water test every 5 years. Especially if you live in an area with metasedimentary rock and, a high incidence of arsenic in drinking water. Maybe once every 5 years isn't enough, because arsenic levels can change depending on rainfall and drought, and climate change type things are affecting groundwater and drinking water. It's not something we've put into our equation yet of standards that we should be setting for drinking water and frequency of testing. But students are seeing this when they can have a continuum of, engagement with a project like this. And then occasionally the middle school students hit high school, and we'll see it again if I have middle schools and high schools in the same community involved. It's always interesting at all the levels. Also, I've noticed that there are families resistant to putting in filtration systems in their homes until the second child. It took 2 kids in the house to lobby for something at the household level, but it just kind of drove home with parents, oh, this is for real. This wasn't just a one-off with the first child in the program. Years later, the second child came along. We still have this problem, and this time we're going to address it.
Which also goes along to what you said about it takes some people time to catch up and to really take a minute to see what the impact really is.
Yes. Now I am 65 this year, and I feel like I am running out of time, but I want to try to still maintain that patience and not get that kind of manic, everything has to happen now sort of feeling about things. Although PFAS is one of those things that, because it builds up in your system, I think it would be great to know where your level is at, and that I think that can inform you on whether or not you need to maybe really cut back on exposures. Think carefully about eating food from waxy packaging or takeout food containers, or microwave popcorn bags are notoriously lined with PFAS chemicals, and some dental flosses and all these things that Maine is trying to deal with. They're trying to make it that products that are sold in Maine don't have these things, but that's not going to be true across state lines. And I think some products, some things are going to stay in our pantries and stay under our kitchen sink a lot longer. And we might still be using them or exposed to them, even after regulations have changed and tried to get these things out of our homes. So that's why I'm interested in how kids can be involved in inventories and helping to convey messages about changing things that we can change, controlling what we can control so that we can keep our blood PFAS levels low. Otherwise, it messes with your cholesterol and your cardiometabolic system, and, we don't want to age too fast.
No, we got too many things to do. Jane, this has been a delight. I am so appreciative. You and I had talked about this months ago in a much shorter format, and actually that was kind of where I was like, I need to talk to Jane and get more details about this work.
Well, I'm flattered, and thank you for listening to the whole story, because it is circuitous and complex.
And it's kind of the perfect synopsis of modern life in any career, I think, and especially in science. So I appreciate your work, and I especially appreciate your whole face is lit up through this entire conversation, even the hard parts, but especially when you were talking about the teachers and the students. It was really great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Maine Science Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by following us on your podcast platform of choice. And please leave a rating and review. It will help more people find us and help spread the word about some of the remarkable people doing science in Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is recorded at Discovery Studios at the Maine Discovery Museum in Bangor, Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is executive produced and hosted by me, Kate Dickerson, and edited and produced by Scott Loiselle. And the Discover Maine theme was composed and performed by Nick Parker.